I want to start off with a slightly bigger picture question, and I'm going to go to Laura first, which is, what's your biggest worry about the global economy? What's the tail risk that we may not be thinking about right away? And is it homegrown in the US? Is it geopolitical in nature? Is it, or is everything going to go along fine, as it seems to have been doing since COVID in the US economy?
I'm going to say my tail risk concerns are political and geopolitical. I noted as I was walking down the hallway on the CNN screen story in the Wall Street Journal about how if Trump is elected, he wants to basically take away the independence of the Federal Reserve. And that's part of his plan. So basically, that's a tail risk. I will let Michael Vesloff talk about the tail risk associated with Trump being president, but I'm saying a tail risk is undermining of the Federal Reserve. Another thing that I will say, geopolitical, is that the president has the authority to essentially, if he wants, or she wants, slap 50% tariffs on China, 10% tariffs across the board. That's another thing that's being proposed. So that, in terms of inflation, in terms of price rises, in terms of cost rises, in terms of making the U.S. less competitive as a place, because all the supply chain that comes in would have those imports, it could actually end up, as tariffs often do, strengthening the dollar, which then will depress exports. So it's actually an inflation-depressing set of policies if those tariffs go into effect. The president has the authority to do it, and he has said, that candidate Trump has said he will do it. So.
Thanks. That's certainly two big economic things to worry about. I want to ask Liaquat to comment on that, and maybe you have other concerns, but given your background, maybe you can also say, why is it the markets don't seem concerned about those scary geopolitical risks and political risks? Is it just that it's too hard to price? Or is it that, in the end, yes, terrible things happen in the world, and actually the US stock market, at any rate, goes on going up?
So, actually, do I need this? I do. Okay. So, I used to be a bond trader, and I always think the bond market is much smarter than the equity market.
Of course.
And we used to have this sort of a rule of thumb that the UK was always a great forecaster of what was going to happen in the US. And I think what you saw when Liz Truss tried her little antics is a precursor to what may happen here. That I think we are getting a situation where the bond market is getting repriced. That the supply-demand dynamics have totally changed. There isn't a buyer of first resort or last resort in the US anymore. It was for the decade of the 2000s and maybe the 1990s, foreign central banks. It has, for the last 10 years, it's been the Fed. Both of those are getting out of the business. So I think we could get a return of the bond vigilantes, which could cause a major repricing of where interest rates, long-term interest rates are. And I think combine that with the fear of the sort of things that Laura was talking about, a sort of over-inflationary policy associated with presumably a Trump administration, but maybe also with a Democratic administration, poses the biggest macro risk to me.
Thanks. And for those of you, I'm sure you do all remember about Liz Truss's antics, but for those of you who may not, what happened was that she announced, and her chancellor announced, some very expansionary policies at just the right moment, and when everybody, or the wrong moment, when everyone was concerned about inflation, and you had a shortage of buyers of UK bonds and a rapid interest rise in interest rates that then triggered a lot of incipient problems in the bond market and in the pensions market and insurance market. And the Bank of England stepped in and she stepped down. John, do you want to maybe pull out a bit to not the geopolitical so much, but the international economic issues and what worries you most?
Yes, I have a principle that you're rarely seriously hurt by the things you've been worried about.
Yeah.
It's the stuff you take for granted that gets you in real trouble. So I've been trying to think that way. Just add, it seems to me that there were three things that are really critical here and underlay what we've heard. One is the outlook for inflation. The market, not just investors, officials, etc., obviously have had a very hard time not only predicting inflation, but really understanding the whole process of price formation. So underneath this all is a lot of uncertainty, intellectual uncertainty about, do we really understand this process well and can predict it and therefore control it? So this is an area that I think about, and I still tend to think, although you can build risk cases other ways, I still tend to think that the story is disinflationary. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about global growth. The IMF's latest forecast, which is a consensus forecast, but it doesn't mean it's wrong, is that the next 5 years is essentially going to be some of the slowest years of global growth, the slowest extended period of global growth in decades, which ought to be disinflationary. Also, I have no idea what really would happen in a Trump administration, but what I've been reading is that if there's planning that's going on, and obviously the idea that the White House would issue instructions to the Federal Reserve is very unsettling. That's how it used to be done in England, and back when England used to be known as very inflationary, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But that the plans are a substantial reduction in the scope and scale of the federal government.
Right.
And that's, in other words, following the latest Argentine model. Is that possible? And if so, what would that mean? That's a risk I think people haven't really thought about. But once again, I would imagine in the short run would be, on the one hand, increase uncertainty, but ought to also be disinflationary. And the other aspect is something that this group has talked about, I've talked about. The last time we had a crisis, i.e. the global financial crisis, we're accepting COVID, the last financial crisis, there was no sense of great power conflict in searching for solutions, for collaborative solutions. And it's hard to know if there were a challenge, would once again the principal economies decide, as they did in 2008, 9, 10, if we don't hang together, surely we will hang separately? Or would the national interests or regional interests or allied interests trump the common good? These are the things I worry about. In essence, that to me, these are skewed towards slower growth and disinflation.